Welcome to
hold
Think.
on. Sorry, hold on. I need to open the window. It's so warm in there.
That's
That's the quickest moment. That's the most rapid interruption ever, presumably, for a podcast episode. You barely got a second into it. Sorry.
Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor but enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Christopher Such.
Hello again.
And Neil Almond.
Lovely to be here.
And we're back with another episode where my unsuspecting guests field questions they have not yet seen. But first, Chris, what you reading for?
Hey, what you reading for?
This week, or in the past week, I have been reading a book called The Scientific Principles of Teaching Reading by Nathaniel Hansford. I had the pleasure of meeting him recently, and his book aligns so beautifully with what his the way he portrays himself on Twitter and who he is as a person, in that I think he's one of the real unique voices in reading education. He is arguably one of the most conscientious scholars and interpreters of reading evidence that I've met. I would say as well that he possibly sometimes ruffles people's feathers by being quite cautious in his interpretations of the evidence. But I think it just lends him, if anything, even more authority when he does come to a position. Specifically, the book that he's read looks at the value of meta-analyses in reading. He explores that in depth. If that is of interest to you, then this book will be a treasure trove. He's got a great blog as well, and you can follow him on Twitter using @NateJoseph19. Highly recommended. Great guy. Really interesting book. What about you, Neil? What are you reading for?
So I'm going for a listen this week, but it kind of links with reading, and it's called, funnily enough, The End of the World, and it's from a podcast called The Boring Talks. Now, I don't know if we have any Douglas Adams fans and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in here. Lovely. Well, obviously, we know that the end of the world did happen, but, the precise date of the end of the world is never mentioned. So what this person does, Steve Cross, who's just a guest, the Boring Talks, before I go off that, it's just you find people to come on and just talk about boring, mundane things. Like there's a really interesting episode about the black market of European palettes, if that's something that tickles your boat. But the first one, this chap Steve Cross does a close read of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy to try and work out when the Armageddon occurred in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it's like a really, if you've heard the term close reading, you're just like, well, how is that different to just like reading a book, like a first read, a simple layered read, etc. Use this. I think if you were doing like a whole day reading CPD that kind of went from like phonics and like the necessary skills to be proficient at that, fluency, what comprehension is, and then like finally this idea of like close reads, I would definitely spend 20 minutes just to play this at the end, just to say, and this is like what, like, obviously you're not going to get primary kids to do it, but like this is what this actually is, because it's really quite clever. The lovely little twist at the end, which I won't spoil, because I honestly think, Chris, if you haven't listened to this, you would really, really enjoy it. And Kieran, I'm sure you would too. So definitely recommend it. I think it's 21 minutes long. It's not long at all. Thoroughly recommend it. What about you, Kieran? What are you reading for?
Nice. That sounds great. I mean, in terms of the European black market for pallets, I know about, via someone who works in a certain industry, that about quite a large company who were using non-regulation pallets for transporting things. So I've almost had like third-hand experience of this phenomenon. So I'm going to have to listen. I'm actually going to listen to that
exactly what it's all about.
Oh God! If people didn't think I was a nerd before, they've just got bingo there.
So I thought it was way darker than you guys are thinking. I'm thinking it's like pallets as in the roof of your mouth. So people are like decapitating people, taking away chunks of their face. But no, thankfully, that's obviously not what you're referring to in this case.
I mean, I'm going to go for listening too. I mean, recently we've seen the return of Craig Barton's long form podcasts, and someone who I've worked with in the past, Craig Latimer, works at the Creative Education Trust with Nimish in the Midlands, and he's sort of responsible for mathematics, and he talks about his approach to planning mathematics. And I know that we, for a long time, said, well, we need to sit down and talk about this ourselves. But actually, if you listen to that, I think it's close to 3 hours, 8 minutes. They pretty much nailed everything you could possibly talk about when it comes to the planning maths. And both Craigs think really deeply about teaching and about their practice, and it's really good. And I've got Peps's new episode lined up as well, so I'm really pleased to have those back. So this week we've got some questions that have been sent in via Twitter or via the Tadape Discord. You guys haven't seen them, but it's just, I think, instead of shouldering the burden of expertise, as we sometimes try and do when we're having more sort of, not more serious, because some of these are serious topics, but I think it's definitely more opinion based in this situation. So don't stress about the responses you give, because I know that you both like to be extremely prepared when you are talking from that position of experience and expertise. So the first one says that we've just been told in a meeting that we're going to try no hands up at the start of next term. And it's going to be a whole school initiative. Now, I like cold calling and use it as one of my questioning techniques, normally signaling to children before asking a question, but I've never gone as far as no hands. What should I read and what pitfalls should I consider as I prepare for this change? I'm going to get my copy of TLAC off the shelf. What else do I need to know?
Given the history of things like no hands up, I would consider going right back to the OG with Black and William, looking at like the origins of AFL, looking at formative assessment. So Inside the Black Box is a great place to start. I believe, unless I'm mistaken, I read it a while ago. I can't remember the title, so I'm not going to go there. But Dylan William has books on formative assessment that I'd highly recommend. I think is it embedded formative assessment? Is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, I agree. Dylan William has some really good stuff. Shirley Clark also, a lot of her work is based on William's formative assessment stuff, but she puts her own little spin on it. And I remember reading one of her books about formative assessment, which mentions, why we should be doing this as well as various other things. So I'd add that one to the list. In terms of maybe why you wouldn't, Pritesh put out a really interesting blog, literally, I think the last week, about how he insists on all hands up, despite the fact that, he'll always cold call, but he always in terms of 100% attention. I don't know whether it's just the fact I briefly read it and I say we've had the holidays and it's all a blur already, but whether just that simple act of being he asks questions, so there's that active movement just kind of keeps people's attention rather than the whole I can just sit here and twiddle my thumbs. That might be something that you want to think about. Well, maybe we do this, and I kind of think, from my understanding, the reason why schools go for these no hands up policies is just because cold calling isn't embedded at all, and so it's almost like the cold turkey approach, I think, where it's if we just go right, just going to say don't do it, that kind of builds the habit formation up for the teachers and kind of builds those expectations through to for the kids to what to expect. I would be really surprised if it remains always a never put your hands up sort of thing, because I think there is some value in perhaps sometimes just asking a quick check for understanding it. It's, if it, put your hand up, because then you might then go and ask the kids who don't have their hand up still, while still getting a bit of understanding about what's coming back, if the question isn't something that you could bash out on a mini whiteboard quite quickly.
Am I right in thinking, is that Pritesh, and I apologize for my pronunciation if it's off, Raichura? Is that
Raichura? Yeah. The reason I did not say the surname is because I too was not sure how to spell it. So I was like, oh,
yeah, no, I thought I would. I will take on board that culturally insensitive burden, and my apologies to you, Pritesh, if I've not said
famously that. Of Michaela. Now he works at ARC. I've met him a few times. Really, really good bloke. Writes a lot about the minutiae of teaching. I don't know many people who could write several hundred words on the topic of get everyone to put their hands up and put a positive educational reason behind it. So he's definitely worth a find, worth a follow, because he definitely does some interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of pitfalls, it depends on the age range. Presumably we're talking primary teachers. Kids can, however carefully you word this stuff, kids can take stuff quite literally. And if you reach a situation where a child struggles to put their hand up to ask a question, or put their hand up to say that they need to go to the toilet as a result, obviously, I don't need to go into detail on the issues that can come about through that. So being careful around that, lots and lots of following up with, okay, if you need to ask a question though, or if you've got a problem, you can still put your hand up. That might need lots of reiterating if in other circumstances you're trying to say, look, no, I don't want your hands up when I ask a question, because that conditional side of it sometimes gets a little bit lost. I agree with you about the idea of, I do think there's valuable information that you can take when you ask a question and you still cold call, but you've got some hands up first. You get a sense of confidence, or perhaps across the class, you get a sense of which children are happy just to venture an answer when they're not sure, which children always keep their hand down even when they know it. So there are pitfalls to that approach. But I totally get on board with the idea that if you want to go, using your expression, cold turkey, there are good reasons for that, because it's such a deeply embedded habit of putting your hands up to answer questions that sometimes you just need to draw a line under it if you want to change practice across a whole school. One final thing would be, if you feel like it's not quite working for you and so you want to try and adapt it, bear in mind that your colleagues are probably struggling with the same thing, and it would be much easier for you to kind of achieve this together if you're all sticking with it. So discuss it with your colleagues, discuss it with senior leadership about how it's going and what struggles you're having with it, and hopefully it will work out for the best.
Just one more kind of pitfall, because it happens to me all the time, because not that we have a no hands up policy, but I like to cold call as much as I can. Obviously, if you have senior leaders are covering your class, or if you have supply teachers coming in and they don't know names, my God, is that so difficult to try and cold call and get someone to answer a question when they're just I've worked at my school a fair while now. I don't know everyone's name yet. Sometimes I do just have to be like, I'll just go with that person with the hand up, because I don't want to go, oi, yeah, you, I don't know your name, but I want you to answer. Sometimes it's easy to go, oh, lovely, thank you for offering that answer, super. And then I might say, do you agree with them? That kind of thing, to make sure that the person's still involved. But yeah, it's one to think about. Make sure that there's a way to, if you do have supply teachers coming in on a regular basis, or someone covers those lessons who may not get to know the names of those pupils as quickly, there probably needs to be some system in place that means that they can engage with that process as well.
You've just reminded me of something that happened to me when I was first, because obviously you have your own class, you learn the names, you can do all that, and then you go to model teaching for other teachers. And one of the first times I ever did that, I remember it was with a group of 5 or 6 year olds, and I ended up saying, you, young man. It's like, you can't call a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old young man. It's like, oh no, this is quite embarrassing, because obviously you're being watched by the teacher in question as well. But I lived it down eventually.
Yeah. But I think that just goes to show, one of the pitfalls of cold calling. If we're expecting teachers to come in and team teach and all of that kind of thing, there are some, small little barriers, not overcome. I mean, obviously not over insurmountable, just the classic, label and write your name on it and stick it on you whilst Mr. Such comes and teach you. It's all fine. And this is perfectly normal and what we do all the time.
I had to do it quite a lot. I mean, I had 1,032 kids across my 3 schools for a long time, and the mobility sometimes I'd be like, who are these kids? I've never seen them before. So I would, at the start, when I first worked with them, I would say, I'm going to gesture, open palm, sort of in their direction, and then they would start their response with their name, and then eventually I would have their names next time. So that was my. But with 5-year-olds, that's pretty tricky. So, there are probably just linguistic ways around that kind of situation and for how you phrase the questions. For me, the biggest pitfall might be on a strategic level when the purpose gets lost and it becomes a surface level sort of shell. So the no hands up remains, but actually the point of cold calling is lost, and then it becomes pointless. Because if you think about what it's essentially designed to replace, it's designed to replace things like lollipop sticks where you're just asking random questions. So if questioning isn't becoming more deliberate and more purposeful, then I think that could be something to watch out for across the school, like you say, Chris, across all the teachers, reporting back and where do we go from here? Because there's no point in doing something that's not going to be impactful. So the next question says, hi, Kieran, do you have any thoughts about maths testing in year 1? Should there be formalized testing as opposed to teacher judgment?
Can I just say no? Can I say
no?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like formalized. Depends what you mean by formalized testing, but I'm really struggling to think of any circumstance in which you've got all 30 kids quietly getting on with something that will provide you with information that is useful when they are 5 or 6 is the short answer. If by formalized testing they mean, I'm going to sit down with a child one-to-one, and I've got this little pattern of stuff I'm going to work through to see how their number bond development's getting on. And by formal, I mean it's going to be like step by step. I'm going to make sure I do this with all the kids while doing it really kind of in a fun, sensitive way. Then maybe, but I'm guessing that's not what we're referring to here.
Yeah, Chris has taken my answer. Whoever asked the question, you'd have to really dig deep as to what they mean by formally, particularly in maths. I think a lot of it should just be, let's say, you providing the opportunities for them to perform with something, and then you just using observation to infer whether they are being successful. I don't necessarily think there's much use for the teacher anyway. With that, some SLT like data, so some may go, we want to measure progress, and so we want to provide, there are various maths companies out there that do kind of provide, formalized assessments for that age group, so you can get a norm reference test, which means that you can kind of judge that cohort against a sort of national average. Again, I think just that the inferences of those kind of assessments on 5 and 6-year-olds is dodgy at best. So can you really take much from it? I don't know. I don't think the spreadsheet can, but perhaps the teacher who knows those kids and does that assessment and kind of has a look and see what their scores are and realizes that little Kieran actually usually does much better than that, but today he hasn't. So but then you've got to think about, well, was that the best use of Kieran's time, et cetera, et cetera. So on the whole, I'd say no, but I kind of understand why some leaders may want to do it, but in terms of it being valid and useful in terms of the inferences, it's probably not as one to do because the leaders have told you to do it.
I mean, if you talk about statistical noise, I can't think of a noisier place than year 1 when they're all of a sudden expected to behave in a slightly different way than they have been in their previous experience in school. Some of them can't go to the toilet. Some of them, most of them can't write their name. And then you're expecting that to be some sort of valid data point. Yeah, I'm not convinced. I mean, we would have rid of tests in year 2 as well, Neil. We've gone back a long time. We've been trying to wait for the end of Key Stage 1 SATs. So
One more term. One more term.
Is that all? I mean,
This is
it's
the
been
last year,
dangling for
unless
years.
pandemic 2.0, 3.0, however you want to, whatever your accounting system is for it happens, then they should still be going next year.
Just one other thing on this kind of subject of assessment at this age. The stuff I really want to know about kids at this age is the stuff I'm doing all the time anyway. It's the little and often stuff. It is the stuff relating to number bonds, understanding like bits and pieces about their spatial awareness. It's the stuff that I'm doing all day. Well, not all day, but I'm doing every day or every few days. And so I'm picking up on it compared to say like year 6, where if you want to know whether they remember what you taught them about perimeter and ratio, yeah, you might need an assessment that kind of has that breadth. But at that age, there are some key things that I want to know that I sense will let me know that they're prepared for the next step in their mathematics education. And crucially, it's the stuff that we're talking about, that we're doing, that we're playing games with all the time anyway. So I'd be very surprised if I got to the end of the year and I felt like I needed to do a formal assessment to learn that stuff.
Is there anywhere I can go to support the podcast? No, I'm only joking. I just wanted an intro for for Lloyd's song. It's fantastic, isn't it?
It's so good. It's so good.
That was good. I was like, Kofi?
Who would ask that question?
I was well tempted to say, nah, nothing. Not that I can think of. No, but yeah, the song is wonderful. It's glorious.
I've had no, I mean, at the time of recording, I've had no mentions from Kofi listeners, so clearly they're just happy supporting the podcast without listening to it or anything else. So, yeah, so I mean, yeah, if you do want to support the podcast, you can go to www.ko-fi, ko-fi/Tadape, TDAPE.com.
For all of you Ko-fi, Ko-fi, Ko-fu-fu, however you pronounce it, you damn lovely supporters. It's a song going out to you, to you. Okay, here we go. Nikki and a P, Septi, Stephanie Taylor, Mrs. B, Taya, Adam, Katie, Liv Dempsey, Becca, Jenford, Susie, Brown, and Cio, Netchio, Rachel, I am Al, Jessica, Tom Oakley, Tom Brassington, Jessica, Tom Oakley, Tom Brassington, LJ, and last but not least, my lovely little Amy Bill. So they help us pay the bills. So a massive thank you out to Dape family. Ko-fi supporters help us keeping it ad-free. There's far more content coming just round the bend. Thank you all for helping our very special friends. Friends. Very special friends.
The next one's a pretty serious one. It says, I started in September, teaching that is. I've never been so tired. I'm thinking about leaving teaching. There's just too much to do and not enough time. How do other teachers manage their time and the stress that comes with the role?
Kind of like 2 levels where that works on, and you can't really, to a degree, you can't really separate them. As obviously there's, whatever's been asked in your school, and obviously I think that's one of the like really good things about like Twitter and things like that, is that kind of democratization of the kind of knowing what's just happening in other schools that isn't just like your insular school that that you kind of just know, because as you say, teacher is all consuming. That sometimes, particularly in around October, November, sometimes you wonder whether you've actually like seen any daylight, because you're up before the sun comes up, you do what you need to do and you're so focused on the job, and then you leave when the sun goes down and you think there's no time to yourself. So obviously, if you can, if you know that your school isn't the right place, or there are various red flags that what you're being asked to do is perhaps beyond the regular remit of perhaps contemporaries who went to university with you, or teach first, whatever it is, or that if you're started in September, those people that are in your ECT conference group or mentor groups, get chatting to them and work out whether what's happening is, and what's been asked of you is the norm, because that's probably that's like the best place to start, because once you know that there's a clear trajectory here that, well, this isn't normal, so therefore it's certainly a teacher's market out there right now in terms of jobs. So as long as there are roles available for you for your subject, or a geographical area that works for you, you can jump ship quite quickly. And I always kind of tell, being an ECT facilitator, do I have to start the ECT year all over again? Does this look bad? No, absolutely not. It's far better for you to move schools 2 terms in rather than you leave the profession 2 terms in. If, however, the answer to that question is, everyone feels what's been asked of you is, really kind of reasonable. I think I've mentioned it on the podcast a few times. I'm personally just a big fan of the Eisenhower matrix, which is just basically a quadrant where you have some headings of it's important, not important, urgent, and not urgent. Spend the first couple of times just thinking about, right, actually, what do I need to do right now? Block out and kind of codify all those tasks. See if it's important and urgent, then you need to do it. If it's not urgent and not important, but someone's asked you to do it, generally, sack it off. Don't do it, because no one's going to ask you to do it. If it's important but not urgent, then it's not something you need to tackle straight away. And if it's really urgent but not important, well, then if something's urgent but not that important, you perhaps need to question, why it's there in the first place as well. And once you've kind of done that for a couple of months, maybe, you kind of get into the habit of understanding, what's the kind of thing that you would go to do and that you wouldn't necessarily do. And I've found out, and I went on a middle leadership course way back, that was just a useful kind of conceptual framework for which I could organize various tasks, and it did cut down my workload a fair little bit. I don't know whether it's probably not the right thing to do, so perhaps don't do it, but I'm very much of the impression, if it's really important, someone will email me twice about it. There have been quite a few tasks where someone has said, oh, can you do that? And I know that if I didn't answer that question, I wouldn't hear from them again, because they're so busy that they get caught up in everything, and it just doesn't end up happening. If it's really important and really urgent, then hopefully they'll also come and talk to you in person about it and have that kind of bit of dignified human to human interaction if it's something like that. Then I think as well, talk to an experienced teacher, find out what those pinch points are around, the school year, find out when those assessment weeks are. So that, you're planning assessments. So that in your planning, you're not going to, get the kids to write a long piece of work, which you will have to, take home and read. Ask about reports and what templates they use for reporting and the expectations for reports earlier on. And so you can start kind of, building those bits and pieces up. This time last year, I wouldn't say this, but, ChatGPT does have some useful functionality if it is just the mundane paperwork that you feel like, you have to do. And, I've already seen, a few use cases of, not doing all the work, but as I say, the way I kind of feel ChatGPT is really kind of useful. You take the Pareto principle, is that 80% of the work comes from like 20% effort. It probably does like the first perhaps 15% of that effort for you, and then you just kind of have to do make it pretty at the end and sort it all out and tailor what you need. But it's written. I've seen it. People use it to write assemblies. I've seen people to write closed questions. I've seen people use it to write some comprehension questions. That's that's fine. I think, the environment of, the teaching profession is so under the spotlight now as to what teachers actually are, having to do, and that, I can't help but, and I'm usually quite skeptical about all of these things, but, I do feel like a change is eventually coming, not too soon. Otherwise, I do think, England will find itself in a situation where, all the best teachers have gone to work for, third-party organizations who still do a lot of education, work, but obviously, the classroom is where the learning, actually happens.
Yeah, I'm slightly skeptical about that last bit. I've got a feeling that whatever government comes in is just going to like hold on for dear life while this bulge population works its way through the education system, and then afterwards go, "Oh, we've got enough teachers again." Just about. I've got a suspicion that they're just going to nudge class sizes up to like 35 or pushing 40 in some places and just hold on for dear life. First thing to note is it's an obvious thing to say, but it's easy to forget. Everything to you is new. Every single thing you're doing is new. It is slower. It is more stressful as a result. Everything feels overwhelming when it is new. If you've ever like moved home and you've then, you've moved home and you've got a new supermarket, how much it takes you twice as long to get around the supermarket to buy what you want just because you don't understand the layout. First year of teaching is like that first time in the supermarket. It's stressful. It feels noisier. Nothing is on autopilot. When you get to your second, third, fourth year of teaching, increasingly bits more and more becomes on autopilot. It's because you're unconsciously competent at it. So it will get easier is kind of the first thing to say, but loads of good advice from Neil as well in terms of making it easier sooner. From my experience of those first couple of years of teaching, there is 20% of stuff you're asked to do, usually by senior leaders, that is actually optional. Like, we'd really like you to do this thing with these art books. Maybe that's one of those optional things, and trying to find out what they are by discussing it with other teachers, asking to go and look at their books, their working walls, their displays, whatever it might be. Try and find that 20% of stuff that actually some of the experienced teachers realize they don't need to do to a particularly high standard or at all. Again, might sound obvious, but you might not be doing this already, or you might not have taken this advice already. Don't volunteer for anything. When someone says, this Thursday I'm not here, can someone take my club? And there's that silence around the staff room while they wait for someone to say, okay, I will. There is a temptation to be that person, to set the standard. No one is expecting that from you as an NQT. Keep quiet. Do not volunteer for stuff if you are struggling. Better to have you still in the profession than have everyone at your school think you're amazing, but then you leave. Adequacy is plenty. Good enough is, because again, you'll be tempted to say, but I can do this better. No, just whenever you get to the point where you think, this is probably good enough, stop. Be that planning, or be that, working walls, be that any other form of preparation. Good enough is. In terms of whether the school you're at is right for you, I think Neil talked about that more broadly. I would say quite specifically, if you are doing lots of marking, start shopping around at the end of this year, because there are better options out there for you in terms of your work-life balance. This is not to say that schools should never do any form of marking and you shouldn't check books, etc., potentially. But if you are spending 5-10 hours a week writing individual notes to children in their books, that's incredibly inefficient. That is not for the sake of learning, I don't think. As Neil said, it's a tough time of year. Wait to see how you feel after the summer term has been and gone. Yes, there's lots of stressful bits and pieces to do with the end of the school year, like reports, but it does feel very different when you're getting home and it's still light. And I guess the final bit of advice is ask for help. Don't just quietly struggle. Speak to more experienced teachers, speak to senior leaders and say, I'm not waving, I'm drowning. Go to them for help. In a lot of cases, they are really busy themselves and just might not have noticed. And there is a squeaky wheel gets the grease element to this. Don't be afraid to be that squeaky wheel.
Yeah, I think Laura McInerney shared a teacher tap survey. I think 2018, 40% of teachers said they'd retrain to be a teacher. and it was down to something like 23% this time round. So there's quite a lot of
21 for primary. That was the average. 21 for primary school, 25 for secondary.
So I mean, this might be a common thought. So that's why I thought it was worth including. I mean, I think you guys have absolutely nailed the response. There are things that we can do depending on what the factors are that are causing sort of a dissatisfaction, perhaps even a bit more than dissatisfaction. So really consider what you guys have said and then sort of take action based on that. And I think that could be helpful for a lot of teachers. And yeah, I hope you're wrong on the political sort of prediction, Chris. I hope that it gets a proper investment sometime soon.
One last bit of advice that I completely forgot about and wish I'd known about in my first year. The magic 3 words, last year's planning. You'll be surprised how often people don't realize that as an NQT, just being able to take a look at last year's planning, adapt to last year's planning, be it for science, for history, or whatever, that might be an option in a lot of circumstances that you don't realize. Maybe not. Maybe they've not got it saved everywhere or anywhere. Maybe you are expected to plan everything completely from scratch with no support. But if in doubt, just the question, do we have last year's planning for this? It can save you a lot of time and a lot of stress and give you a way to see, hopefully, effective planning done by someone else that can support you in your development as well.
You need to tell that to Kate. She's been teaching 14 years and she seems to be still planning, even though I know the curriculum that she's used for the last 5 or 6 years. And why are you still doing history planning? That you should have that thing nailed. So old habits die hard. Is that a movie? I mean, that could be a movie, couldn't it? And so, I mean, you've mentioned working walls a couple of times there. This is a question that I get lots and lots and lots about. I don't know about you guys. I just wondered if you could point me in the right direction of any research or guidance on working walls, particularly in English, but anything would be a good starting point.
Question, take you point to any research?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know what that would look like. So many variables, like what you're trying to measure there, how you could somehow isolate the working wall as being the sole factor that would somehow, improved learning or not. I don't know. I've never been a fan. I think they take a lot of teacher effort. I think they take a lot of SLT time if it's something that it's, that they privilege. And I'm kind of half of the mindset that really if kids know that it's there, then it could give the impression, well, you don't need to remember this, kids, because it's always it's up there for you, which is why I proudly don't have a times table chart, in year 6, because I don't want them to refer to the times table chart. I want them to know it. I have a few tucked away that if, the odd kid that I know really struggles with it, they can have one and, it's given out to them, but not up there for everyone to, use and refer to. I wouldn't, the same for working walls. I think they look nice, they look pretty, of course they do. I'm sure some children do find them useful and handy, but that cost benefit that it means that it takes to make them, maintain them, to the learning gains that they may or may not produce. I don't think it's right, but if someone does find some way to do some research on that, and it's, we run an RCT and this class had the exact same lesson and this class had the exact same lesson, or, sequences of lessons. But the only difference was that, this working wall that was there and referred to, and this one didn't have a working wall that was referred to. And I'm sure Chris would be able to mention many other variables that I wouldn't be able to, that I can't think about right now. And the gains were statistically significant, then maybe I'd change my mind. But
obviously I'm totally in agreement that I don't think there's any robust research around the use of working walls or displays more generally. I think the closest that I've seen, and I wouldn't even describe this necessarily as robust because it's just one study that looked very vaguely at how busy certain displays were, and then said, "Oh, well, this middle ground seems to be better." I wouldn't, draw too many firm conclusions from that. I do think that a working wall under certain circumstances can be used quite well. You've modeled some writing, you want to stick it up on the wall. They can become a bit of a problem. Like, I worked in a school where I was genuinely asked to write the date on the bottom right-hand corner of anything that I put on the working wall, so that SLT, when they walked around, could work out whether anything had been on the wall for more than like a week. And that was late in my career, and I was not writing the date on anything, but they let me get away with it. Part of that 20% I mentioned earlier. What I would say is, no, we don't really know a great deal about them. I would say use the displays that you have, the working walls you have, in whatever way you think appears to be valuable to your class, makes your life a bit easier. Beyond that, I don't think there's any good advice I can give.
I mean, I think on Craig Barton's blog, he has a bit about the absence of research. I think at the time we discussed this, and we sort of gave a joint response to the last person who asked this, the person whose question I phrased here. And I think they sort of knew what the answer was coming, so I'd be very surprised. But what I am surprised by is how they managed to become such a prevalent part of classroom decor with because Neil's first sentence, how could you possibly work out if it was the learning wall that was impactful or not? How did he get past the front gates? It should have been, awesome. So I hope you guys have enjoyed your opportunity to opine on a range of subjects. All that's left to do is say thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
And everyone at home, if you've got a question, you can send it to thinkingdeeplyinfo@gmail.com. But until next time, thanks for listening.